Hi, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, I was just looking at that old question that the planners, those people who plan their lives so carefully, they always say to him, now, where would you want to be in 5 years' time? Sometimes whenever I looked at where I would be in 5 years' time, it was a complete and utter mystery to me, and probably still is. It kind of reminds me of that joke, if I may digress. 3 men die and go to heaven. They all arrive at the pearly gates, and there's St. Peter. I don't know why it was St. Peter was always the one that was on duty, wasn't he? Anyway, I mean, it could have been any of them, couldn't it? But it was St. Peter, and he said, I'd like to ask you guys, because he spoke like that, because he's all modern up now, I'd like to ask, what would you like people to be saying? And we're looking down now, and we can see what's happening. There you all are, and you're going to be you're going to be laid in rest and on show. What would you like them to look at you as you're lying there in the coffin? What would you like them to be saying about you? And the first man says, well, I'm a Christian. He said, I would love to be seen to have been a man of Christian values, helping my fellow man and spreading the word of God and the Bible. That's what I would like to do. And St. Peter said, that's wonderful. Oh, gosh, that's wonderful. Now, the second man, and you, sir, what would you like them to... Well, the second man was a lot more pragmatic. He said, well, I've worked hard all my life, and I've tried very hard to change things around me. He said, I'd like people to be saying, he was a man who worked for change in the society. He was innovative, he was inventive, he was of good character and a strong discipline. St. Peter said, yes, I can see that would be something that you would like to hear. Anyway, so he said, very good. He said, the third man, he said, there you are. He said, you're lying in state and people are looking down on you. What would you like them to be saying? And the third man said, well, I'd like them to be saying, oh, look, he moved. That's what I'd like anyway, that it wasn't the end. Well, so never mind where would you like to be, where were you 5 years ago? And what does that tell you about how well you planned or how well you've dreamed? Sometimes I think it's a dream, isn't it? Now, for me, all my life, really just been thinking about myself, you know. If I'm terribly honest, I just thought about me, and that's led me into some terrible decisions, selfish, and ones that I would like to be able to go back and change. And I think that I've reached that point where I probably can go back and change some of those things. I can't change the past, we never can, of course, but we can change how we look at it. We can stop seeing it as if it were a terrible catastrophe and seeing it as if it were a learning time, and we can then dot the I's and cross the T's and all other silly metaphors like that, and learn something. And I'd like to do that. I mean, I'm looking back 5 years ago. I was living in a warehouse. No, not in a warehouse. I was living in a squat, actually. It was a house that had the owner had died in and left, and nobody wanted to take it on because it was right in the slump when houses were going for next to nothing compared to the incredible refinanced mortgages that the mortgage companies, when they were involved in that huge scam. Heavens, did I say anything about the big banks? No. Oh, yes, organised crime. Anyway, they were not giving out mortgages that reflected what was owed on them, and so they'd worked it out in some kind of way so that they didn't have to do that. And the house that I was living in with a roommate, was one that was in foreclosure, because the man was probably one of those 3 guys that went to heaven, and he was up there saying, well, I'm not paying, you're not getting anything from me, no, no, no. So no money was being paid, and eventually the house would be repossessed. It would be taken over by the bank, and it would be sold on the courtroom steps for not very much money. But unfortunately, I'd been saving for a long time, and I still hadn't reached not very much money, so I couldn't buy it. Now that left a problem for the people that lived around this nice house, because if it were left unoccupied, it would quickly deteriorate. The grass would go, nobody would take care of it, and it would begin to look a very sorry looking house in what was actually not a gated community, but the next best thing, and it was a very nice community. So had it been owned by another man who was more interested in keeping it up, it would have been a beautiful home. So there we were. So it wasn't mine, I wasn't paying rent, I was just squatting, I was keeping it in nice order so that the neighbours didn't suffer, and that was my return on it, and that's how I got into the house in the first place, because the next door neighbour said, oh, for God's sake, we don't want this to turn into a slum, let's help somebody to get into it. And I suppose that I looked decent enough that they thought that I would keep my end up, and that's what I was doing. There was no future in it, there was no joy in it anymore. I used to ride my bike a lot, which I enjoyed very much. I built a couple of really nice bikes, giving one of them to my son, and the other one I enjoyed riding a fixed wheel, and it was a work of art. Not just a bike, it was a work of art that I rebuilt, and I was very pleased with it, and even old ladies used to say, that's a lovely bike, young man. Don't you love being called young man at my age? Yes, indeed. So I came to the Philippines, and I've talked enough about coming to the Philippines. Somebody who didn't like me coming to the Philippines said, you're running away, and I said, you're damn right I am, and so I ran away, and I came to a life which has turned into something of a mission. Not something of a mission, it's turned into a wonderful mission, and everything kind of fell into place. Now I wonder how much, if we're to go along with that idea that everything that we think is what will eventually become our lives, did I ever dream that I would be doing what I'm doing now and hardly thinking of myself? No, I don't think that I would have thought that. But once I entered that situation where I lost everything, I had good work, I was working as a commissioned artist on special orders, and I was doing pretty good. And then I married a Chinese lady, and beautiful though she was, it didn't turn out to be a beautiful result, nor a beautiful marriage. Whose fault was that? Well, I'll have to take responsibility myself and say I made a bad choice. It happens. So I lost everything. Lost my wife, my marriage, I lost my house. I had, at that time, I had 4 cars. I lost my cars. They got sold off one by one. And so my life sort of quickly headed straight for the toilet. A flushing toilet, as it happens. So, is there any tears? If I look back on it now, it was instrumental. It was my moment that, if you listen to any of the great motivational speakers, they all have such a moment. They all say, I remember listening to Antony, was it Antony? Oh God, I always say it. Tony something or other, very famous guy, and he was saying how he was in a little tiny flat, a little tiny apartment in Los Angeles, I think it was, and the world had crashed around him. Nobody loved him. Nobody, it seemed, and it didn't seem like it could get any worse. And I guess that was his moment. That was a moment when he said, this can't be allowed to go on. I'm going to change this. And I realized in that moment when I lost everything, I realized I can't let this go on. So I started preparing to come to the Philippines. Why did I come to the Philippines? Because my son, who just got married, was here in the Philippines, living a quite happy life, and living at this something of a mansion that his mother owned. Now she expressed the willingness for me to come and visit him, so without any thought of a time frame, I thought, I'll go and see Theo. And that's what I did, and I arrived in Manila, and they had driven down to pick me up from San Fernando, and I came back, and Theo and I spent some great time together, but it became very obvious that he had a life, and having his old man hobbling around with him was not really going to be the ideal life. So then I realized, well, I'm actually on my adventure, why don't I take it to the next step? And that's what I did, and I took it to the next step, and I moved out, and I found an apartment. I had bought an old 1970s VW Beetle, and I was in the process of spending money. I had a few grand dollars, and I think I came out with about $2,000, which translated into quite a reasonable amount because I was still getting my pension. So I'd been there for a few months, and I started to take an interest in doing up this old Volkswagen. And I moved to the same street that the mechanic lived on, and I used to walk down there. I was actually very happy. I took my laundry into a local place which was just around the corner, and they did my laundry and parceled it up very nicely. I used to go out and eat every morning, have a 30 peso, 40 peso haircut whenever I needed it. Life was good. And then I thought I need to make a move on something else, and I spoke to someone who mentioned about Cebu, and that was when I came to Cebu. So that was the real start of my adventure, because that's when I found out the probable reason that, call it what you will, I'd been guided to this place. I do feel that you are guided. What does someone who is, this thing about being guided, it varies depending on your beliefs. My beliefs are we are multidimensional beings, and we listen to those parts of us that are higher than the one that's marching around on size 9 feet. And it seems to me that we need to be listening, otherwise we'll miss all of these messages. It's a little bit like having your head in a book and somebody's talking to you, and you're in the adventure of the book, and they're telling you that you better get ready for school, or you better get ready for work, or you're going to be late, or there's a fire just next to your feet or something, and you're not listening, you don't get the messages. Well, I did tend to listen, and I felt, wait, Cebu, it just sounds a great place. It wasn't the great place that I thought, because soon after I arrived, the US cut my pension off. So I entered a very broke place. It took quite a few months to get that off. Now, during that time, I met this lovely lady. Now, here's another little aside. When you think that things must be perfect, you're really hampering yourself in such an incredibly silly way. Because when things are perfect, there's no need. Why would you change them? I mean, if I'd been perfectly happy in that house that I was in Fort Myers, I was living in a very nice house. I only paid bills, which I could do easily from my pension, and I lived rent-free. Had a beautiful bike that I rode around on, and had I looked at that as if it were perfect, I wouldn't have made a move. But I thought something's lacking here. This is not how my life is supposed to end. And once you get to 70, you can quickly buy into the idea, well, I remember this when I was in my 20s or 30s. If I heard about somebody dying when they were 7, well, he's had a good life, hasn't he? He's had a good innings, 70. I mean, he's not got anything to complain about, has he? Well, hold on, I don't want to go yet. So I thought, wait a minute, and I spoke to my son then, and I said, I'm really feeling like I need to get on and start another adventure. And he said, go for it. Because he was about to start on his adventure anyway, because he was about to leave to go and seek a job in San Diego, 4,000 miles on the other side of the country. So he wasn't going to miss me. And so I came out and I started this life of mine. And even then it didn't work out altogether. It wasn't perfect. Beth and I didn't go into this perfect relationship where she looked at me and just thought that was so wonderful, and I looked at her and thought the same. No, it didn't. It wasn't like that at all. We looked at each other and we thought, this could be right. And you know something? That's probably as certain as a lot of people ever get about this person that they're proposing to spend their life with. I don't know anybody who is that certain about anything. They may say so, but I think in retrospect they've changed enough about how they feel or how they felt back then at that time, and they've made a feeling that they had at the time into something definite. Oh yeah, I knew that he was the one. I knew she was meant for me. The first 5 minutes that I was there, I said, I'm going to marry you. I really don't think that it works quite like that. So, where was I 5 years ago? I was on the cusp of making the most important move of my life. Where were you 5 years ago, and how has it worked out? It's an interesting question to ask yourself. Where were you 5 years ago compared to where you are right now? How did it work out? A lot changed for me. I wonder how much it changed for you. Good question to ask yourself. And then look at 5 years hence, and back then, how daring were you? What kind of a magnificent dream did you have for yourself? Did you go, well, I'd really love to do this, and then that little voice in the back says, oh, come on, you can't do that. We all have that voice, you know. If it had a head, you'd just want to beat it on top of the head, but it doesn't. It's just a little voice echoing in the back of your head. Did you listen to that voice? Did you let it put you down? Was it the voice of somebody that lives in your life that you actually should give the elbow to? Sorry, the elbow. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to learn from that right now? How are you going to change the way that you are thinking now in order to have a 5-year point, hence, which you're really happy to have? I think it's a good question. I think it's one which I learned a lot from myself. If anything, I should have dreamed bigger. If anything, I should have wanted more in terms of the change that I experienced, because it could have been possibly even greater than it is now, sooner than it is now. See what a greedy devil I am. Oh, this is a foreigner in the Philippines. Think about it. Thanks for looking in. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Bye for now.